A-S-T, hold fast. It is, I think, the fact is that today Fatah is more extreme than it has been. Mohammed Dakhlan, one of Arafat's closest lieutenants and now a senior person in Fatah, said explicitly that Fatah never recognized Israel's right to exist. Fatah never recognized the Oslo Accords, and it is foolish. I don't think Israelis are going to do this, but it is foolish on the part of anyone to imagine that it is wise to offer at this moment a state to a national movement that is less concerned with building its own nation than it is with destroying another. It continues to be, the Palestinian national movement, very much the child of Yasser Arafat. That's a tragedy for Israel. It's a tragedy for Palestinians too. On the second point, yes, little Satan and great Satan, they want to destroy us both. And we are foolish to imagine that Iran does not have global ambitions. Look, a point that is often argued in Council on Foreign Relations type places, they say, well, look, Iran is fundamentally a rational actor. They know that Israel is sitting on a large stockpile of nuclear weapons. They're not about to strike Israel. They're not about to start World War III or IV, or whatever you want to call it. But let me sort of put this to this audience. In 1914, the Germany that invaded France was a nasty authoritarian country. But it was not hell-bent on reshaping the face of the world. It wanted to adjust its borders in Europe. It wanted more colonial possessions in Africa and the Pacific and where else. But it didn't want to reshape the world. There were Jews who fought in the Kaiser's armies. Okay? The Germany that invaded France in 1940 was a very different kind of Germany. It wanted to reshape the face of the world, literally reshape the face of the world in its own demonic, racialist, Aryan image. It was not a national, it was not simply, this wasn't Germany simply as a nation state adding to its prerogatives in the way that nation states do. This was a revolutionary movement that had global ambitions. We've seen those kinds of movements in the past. Napoleonic France was one, Nazi Germany was another, Soviet Russia was a third, and I would argue that Iran, if you attend to what they say and attend to what they do and how they do it, they see themselves as a vanguard of a revolutionary Islamic movement that intends to reshape first the Islamic world, but then the world entirely according to its own dictates. And possessing a nuclear weapon is a key ingredient in that ambition. It's important to understand what Iran is. Iran is not a country, it's a cause, and it's a malign cause. So that's a kind of extended way of answering the gentleman's question.
Well, I have two more questions. It's interesting that we've been here for almost an hour and a half, let's say, in September of 2009, and the word settlements has not come up yet. And I think it has to come up.
Okay.
Not long response, but what do you see the role of that issue in this current situation? Is it something that the administration is just trying to use to show the Arab world that it can pressure Israel? Is it a real issue?
I'm glad you asked the question. Look, there's a lot not to like about the settlements. And to speak very plainly, there's a lot not to like about many of the settlers. There is among, not all, not even a majority, but among some settler communities, militancy, anger, not only contempt for Palestinians, but a militant contempt, a contempt for Israeli law, that does Israel no justice. Okay? That said, I wish settlements were the problem. Now let me explain what I mean by that. If Israel merely had a territorial dispute with its neighbors, with the Palestinians, then you could make the argument, well, if you've got a territorial dispute, adjust the borders, move people around. By all means. 54-40 or fight, you know, okay, you want to draw the latitude or here, there, whatever, we'll move the borders around. The conflict would have been resolved a long time ago if Israel merely had a territorial dispute. Everything that has happened from 1993 onwards has shown that Israel does not have a territorial dispute. It has an existential dispute. The issue, in other words, is not 1967. The issue is 1948. It's not the borders of Israel, it's the existence of Israel. Okay? So it's very easy, okay, to go to some settlement community and say, these guys are whack jobs, right? I mean, look, you know, they're putting their children in harm's way. You know, they're living in the middle of the Gaza Strip, and secular kids from Tel Aviv have to go to these godforsaken settlements and live in fear of their lives for 3 months at a time because 200 settlers want to live in this place with only a theoretical connection with Jewish history or a partial connection to Jewish history. I'm talking about Gaza. I'm not talking about Hebron or Shem or, you know, these places. Okay. This is a problem, and it's normal that Israelis said, you know something, this is not really what we want to send our children off to die for. That being said, okay, settlements are not the core of the problem. You can remove all the settlements you want, you can expand settlements, you can do whatever you want to do, but that will not resolve the problem. What will resolve the problem is if you get someone like King Hussein, of the late King Hussein of Jordan, who at some level was enough of a gentleman or a realist to say, enough of this. I do not want to be the next Saladin. I simply want to be the president of a little state in the Middle East which intends to be normal and prosperous and deliver better benefits for my people the way that, say, Belgium. No, that's a terrible example. You know, the way that, say, Costa Rica does. Terrific. When that leadership appears, the problem will be settled in weeks. Until that leadership appears, the problem will never be settled, no matter how many settlers are removed. When the book The Israel Lobby came out, I mean, it was an embarrassment on a whole number of, I mean, it was an offense, but it was also an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment. I'm a graduate of the University of Chicago, and intellectually speaking, I was embarrassed by the caliber of its thinking. I mean, the misuse of quotations, including quoting me, but, you know, all kinds of stuff. But the stupidest thing about the book, okay, is that it speaks of the Israel lobby as if the Israel lobby consists of, say, AIPAC, ADL, a couple of other organizations that, you know, are just all powerful. American support for Israel is not the product of a lobby, although that lobby does its work and good work for the most part on discrete legislative points like any other kind of lobby does. But typically the most powerful lobbies in America, like the AARP or other lobbies, it's not that they represent some narrow point of view. They represent something that you might call an American consensus. Now, whether you're a liberal or a conservative in this room, you voted for McCain, you voted for Bush, I bet none of you, okay, believes that the United States should immediately withdraw from the NATO military organization. Why? Because all Americans think it's pretty much a good idea that we should be in NATO. Sure, there might be some crackpots on the margins who say no to NATO. I bet none of you, whether you're Republican or Democrat, believes that, let's say, you know, government has zero role in supporting the widow and the orphan, okay? There's a role of social support. Now, whether you believe it should be at the $1 trillion or $10 trillion level, you know, I have my views. But there are, on a whole number of issues, there's an American consensus. Israel happens to be, support for Israel happens to be a core American consensus position. Consistently, since the moment of its founding in 1948, a wide majority of Americans have basically looked at this country and said, yeah, good guys, they're kind of like us, we're for them. It's a Joe Sixpack position, but it's a very real position. It's not just a Joe Sixpack position. Zionism as an idea was present before the Revolutionary War. When George Washington sent that wonderful letter to a temple in Newport, Rhode Island, he said, "It is no longer mere toleration that we speak of." There was the attitude towards Jews. Not far from here, there's Yale University with its look at the insignia of the place. James Madison had to go take an extra year at Princeton because he flunked his Hebrew classes. Anyway, this kind of belief in Zionism, this kind of emphasis on the Old Testament, is deeply a part of the American story, going back before 1948, and has become more so now. So when you talk about the American-Israeli relationship, it's not because a bunch of mockers like Malcolm Hoenlein, or, yeah, I like Malcolm, he's a great guy, he does good work, but, 5 guys in a room are sitting together and saying, right, folks, let's grease the skids on the latest sale of weapons to Israel. When Mearsheimer and Walt wrote about this, they said, the entire media is in the tank for Israel. Both the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal and the editorial pages of the New York Times are all pro-Israel. What do I have in common with Abe Rosenthal, the editor, Maureen Dowd, Gail Collins, these people, nothing. Well, what we have in common is there are some bedrock values, and among them is support for Israel, because in Israel we find a reflection of our values, our ambitions, our sense of a heroic country and a heroic destiny. So that is the nature of that relationship. Can I make one tiny last point? Okay.
We have full news rate in about 5 minutes.
Okay. Look, I've served you some pretty thick broth tonight, and I don't want you to be totally depressed. So I want to tell you a story, kind of like the story I began this speech with. It's a wonderful book by James Clavell, who wrote these big pot boilers, Taipan, Shogun. He wrote a book that was mainly a memoir called King Rat, based on his experiences as a Japanese prisoner of war. It was made into a good film. And in the book, he relates, or one of the characters relates his experience as a British Air Force pilot who was shot down over what were then the Dutch East Indies, Indonesia today, during the Second World War. So he's shot down over some jungle in Japanese-occupied territory, but he's taken in by a friendly, very, very primitive, but friendly tribe. And so, of course, he's grateful for their hospitality, and he's brought to the hut of the chief of the tribe. And it's incredibly primitive, thatched roofs, no electricity, no running water, dirt floors. And there, in the middle of this hut, there's a toilet bowl. It's not connected to anything, it's just a porcelain toilet bowl in the middle of the hut. Okay. Doesn't want to say anything, doesn't want to offend the chief. But after, he's there for a while, he gets a bit friendlier, and he says, "Chief, I'm just kind of curious, why do you have this toilet bowl there?" She says, "I don't know, it kind of just amuses me when, people are like, why is this toilet bowl there?" Now, why am I talking about this? You may wonder. A toilet is a very interesting thing. What you see is just a bowl, basically, on a stand. But a toilet is connected invisibly to pipes, which are connected to a sewage system, which is maintained by engineers and plumbers, which has to be then fed by reservoirs and has to be incorporated in some notions of hygiene, which actually express the highest values of Western civilization. Not long ago, I was in Dubai. You'll see there's a connection here. Okay. And in Dubai, they're building the tallest building in the world. It's incredible. It's twice the height of the Empire State Building. I think it's 2,600 or 2,800 feet high. And you go and you're like, wow, that's amazing. Look at the height of that building. And of course, there's tons of stuff in Dubai, these artificial islands, these indoor ski slopes, all in the desert.